Good evening and welcome once again to History Hunters. I'm Pete Jones. Grandstaff Huntington Funeral Home helps sponsor this program, and if you enjoy it, you might say something to one of the nice people out there. This evening we're going to talk about another very interesting Wabash resident, Meredith Kidd, who was not born here, but came here. He was born in 1829 in Connersville, Indiana. And when he was very, very young, his family moved to Miami County, and they farmed on the south bank of Eel River in Miami County. Meredith Kidd's life was filled with adventure, really, and interesting occupations. He was an attorney, he was a newspaper publisher, he was a soldier, he was a gold miner, and very briefly, he was a cowboy. And you're pressed to find anybody whose career has been that varied. He read for the law in Peru. And of course, in those days, you did not have to go to law school. There were only a handful of law schools in America. And the common practice, depending upon what state you were in, you would become an apprentice of a sort to an established attorney. You would read the law in that attorney's library. You would file papers, you would go to court, you would watch your mentor in action, and after a suitable period of time, again, in most states, you would sit before a board of 4 or 5 established attorneys, and they would quiz you. And if they thought you were qualified, they would grant you admission to the bar. And that's how Meredith Kidd became an attorney. He read for the law in Peru, admitted to the bar in 1851. He had spent a brief period of time at Asbury College, now known as DePaul. But he was a restless man. He moved from time to time. And I can see from reading about him how he and college maybe didn't get along. Well, he didn't get along very well in his early law practice for whatever reason. And he, shortly after passing the bar examination in Miami County, he headed west and he went to the gold fields in California. And he was there for 5 or 6 years. And quite frankly, did not make a lot of money. He certainly was not successful as a gold miner. In fact, when he came to Wabash to practice law in 1857, his net worth was right at $600, and he married well. Though he married shortly after he came here, and he married Millicent Fisher, the daughter of Stearns Fisher, once the chief engineer of the Wabash and Erie Canal, and one of the wealthiest men in Wabash County at that point. Fisher's wealth was estimated at $12,000 plus a sizable amount of farmland. And here his daughter marries a man worth $600. Draw your own conclusions at that. But he was a popular man here for the most part, and very soon he was elected as prosecutor for what was then a very large circuit court area. It consisted of Wabash, Huntington, Miami, Grant, and Cass counties. So he had his plate full, no doubt. He's the prosecutor in this very, very large circuit. He went off to the Civil War, and at the Battle of Nashville, his horse was shot out from under him. He was uninjured, stayed in the military. He entered the Civil War, by the way, at the rank of captain, perhaps due to his professional background. And in 1864, just before the war was over, he was ordered to go west. And he engaged in some of the very last battles in the Indian Wars. Now the Civil War was still going on, but he was on the frontier by this time. He came home in 1866 and bought the Wabash Plain Dealer and became its publisher and editor. He and the paper had done battle before, and he would do battle with the Plain Dealer after he sold it. He didn't own the paper but a few months. And as you go back through some of the old copies of the Plain Dealer, you run into occasional articles about Major Kidd, which certainly were not flattering to him. So maybe he bought the paper out of spite, I don't know. But career in journalism didn't agree with him. He bought the paper in 1866. He sold it in 1867 when he returned once more to the military. Now, there are stories which have no documentation that I have ever found, but there are stories that he went back into the Army at more or less at the invitation of General Grant. That Grant wanted him in the western frontier. I can't document that story. I've never found paperwork documents to back that up. But he was sent to Fort Larned in west central Kansas, almost on the high plains, not quite on the high plains of Kansas, but certainly in tall grass country. And Fort Larned was important because from Fort Larned, some troops were dispatched to the Indian Wars, but it was very, very close to the Santa Fe Trail, and cavalry from Fort Larned over the years had provided escort service from time to time to people traveling, mostly commercial traffic even then, on the Santa Fe Trail. Fort Larned is 50 miles or so northwest of Dodge City. Now, there was no town there at the time. The fort was built, and then the town of Fort Larned sprang up nearby. Fort Larned was responsible for the creation of that little town. The town grew quite rapidly at first, but then population leveled off, and I think it's a town today of about 3,000 people. Now, for any Purdue basketball fans out there, it might be of interest to you that Gene Cady was born in Larned, Kansas in, I believe, 1936. So he came from Larned. Their most noted product, by the way. They take great pride in this little town that Gene Cady was born there. Fort Larned new buildings were under construction at Fort Larned when Major Kidd arrived there. He had with him his wife, Millicent, and 2, maybe 3 of their children. The oldest child, Rose, was 8 years old at the time. And I've often thought that what a shock that must have been to his family, traveling from Wabash, surrounded by bountiful fields and lots of trees and green grass, They landed out there in Fort Larned, 20 inches of rain or so a year, tall grass country in a good year of moisture, and not very many trees in sight. That must have been quite a shock, particularly to young Rose. The fort now is a National Historic Site. It's run by the National Park Service. Now, it itself is not a national park, but it's a National Historic Site. And so it's under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. And my wife and our daughter Kate from Kansas City stopped there 3 years ago. And when they learned that we were from Wabash, they kind of took us under their wing. You know, we had not made we didn't even know we were going to stop there, frankly. And we walked into the headquarters building, and I said, by the way, we're from Wabash, Indiana. And right away that caused a little stir, because the staff there at Fort Larned was at that time gathering information on Major Kidd, because they were redoing some of the buildings and the little museum there, and they were in the process of making Major Kidd's family the poster children of that fort. Now, we haven't been back, but I think if you would go out there today, you would find photographs of the Kidd family and posters around the little museum. They took us over to one of the buildings that they were just beginning to renovate, and it was the post commander's residence. So it was the building where Major Kidd and his growing family lived while they were at the fort. I haven't heard from anybody out there. I sent them some things early on, and we kind of traded information, and I would love to stop back out there and see what they have done with Major Kidd and his family from Wabash. Now, Major Kidd, again, a restless man who liked to not to be idle. Let's face it, there were long stretches of time out there at Fort Larned where there must not have been much to do. And the Major developed a reputation for heavy drinking. And he developed a reputation for spending an awful lot of time with his senior officers playing poker. In fact, later on, he was charged with neglect of duty, and he had to go to Washington, D.C. to defend himself. It fell short of a court-martial, but he was vindicated in this hearing in Washington. Fort Larned became the site of one of the major Indian conferences, treaty conferences, and this all happened while Major Kidd and his family were there. He left Fort Larned in 1868, and for the next several months, with his family left at Fort Larned, the Major traveled north into parts of Wyoming, visiting, negotiating with some Indian tribes. And then there's a story that I've run onto about Major Kidd. He was sent to Oklahoma, and he was ordered to establish what is described as a camp near Lawton, Oklahoma. And Fort Sill, a fort that is still in operation in Kansas, it's the center of artillery training today, but Fort Sill is a major military installation in Oklahoma. And there is some little bit of evidence that Major Kidd was one of the founding officers at Fort Lawton, or Fort Sill rather, near Lawton, Oklahoma. I've tried to unravel that mystery, and at the time I couldn't get much help from the museum at Fort Sill, because the fort was under restrictions under the lockdown and the pandemic, and the funding for the museum had been drastically cut. I'm going to look into that some more, because I think it would be interesting if we would find that a man from Wabash was one of the founding officers of what today is still a major military installation. While after his hearing in Washington in about 1870, he resigned from the Army. Whether it was to avoid eventual court-martial or not, I don't know. But the record, as I said a moment ago, shows that he was vindicated against these charges. But he went west again. He went to Texas. Now this is 1871. And he bought a herd of cattle. Don't know how big a herd of cattle, don't know what he paid for it, but he had to have accumulated some money by that time, or let's face it too, he may have had help from his father-in-law back in Wabash. But he bought cattle and headed them north into Kansas. We don't have any diary or any letters of this period of his life, but the odds are in 1871 that he drove his cattle north on the Chisholm Trail, because this was the peak of the Chisholm Trail. The Chisholm Trail ran north to the railheads in Kansas, and the trail split in north central Kansas. Part of the trail branched off to Abilene, went to the east, went northeast to Abilene. The other fork in the trail went northwest. Now I got to come back. I've dropped the name of the town, but anyway, there were two cattle towns out there that were quite prominent, Abilene being maybe the more famous. So we assume that he drove his cattle there. It wasn't long before railroads expanded into Texas. So it is safe to say that Meredith Kidd was on one of the last great cattle drives headed north into, well, Dodge City there. It came. Dodge City was the other railhead, and we don't know which one he chose, but probably it was one of those. He came back to Wabash, resumed his law practice here, and then on December the 19th in 1881, Millicent died. There were 5 children, 5 living children at that time. They had lost another child in infancy. But here he was. He's got 5 children. What's he going to do? Well, it wasn't long before he remarried. And to whom was he married this time? Millicent Fisher's sister. And she raised the Harriet Fisher raised the children. He was married on October the 17th in 1883. 1884, he runs for Congress. And he ran on the Democrat ticket. He had been a Republican earlier in life, but had a run-in, as I understand, with local politicians, and decided that he would jump to the Democratic Party. Wabash was in the old 11th district. We had more representatives in Congress from Indiana then than we do today because of population shifts. But the 11th district, consisting of areas, Grant County, Wabash County, Miami County, Cass County, White County, and a couple of others. That was the district from which he sought election to Congress. He lost to Major Steele from Marion, another Civil War veteran. He lost by 52 votes. He briefly challenged the results of the election, but Congress was in Republican hands by that time, and so his appeals of the election fell short and were rejected. And it's at this time that he gained some established law practice here. He had a number of clients, and he seems to have performed his duties for those clients quite well. In 1892, sideline here is that Harriet Fisher, his second wife, was a major factor in the WCTU. So I think that if it is true that the major had a drinking problem, maybe his second wife got him straightened out on that. But Harriet Fisher was nationally known as a member of the WCTU, and she was at one time state president of the WCTU. In 1892, Major Kidd accepted a position on the Dawes Commission, dealing with Indian Territory, mostly in Oklahoma. And he left Wabash and went back to Oklahoma for several months while the commission was active. His last years were spent on a fruit farm in Arkansas. I don't know where in Arkansas, but he maintained regular correspondence with people here, and some of his letters from Arkansas appear in editions of the Plain Dealer. Now his family, the children, are interesting. Rose married an attorney named Beer. She became a controversial physician in the Philippines, came back to this country and lived with her husband and her family in Colorado. And she became very prominent in medical circles in Colorado. She's worth a program on her own. Rose Kidd Beer. Another daughter, Helen, became a physician. Now keep in mind that these were times when there were not very many women physicians. Two of his daughters practiced medicine. There was a son who, I guess maybe you can draw the conclusion, wasn't quite as ambitious maybe as other siblings. He left Wabash at the age of 20. And as far as I know, he never came back here. He settled first in California and then shortly moved to Mexico, where he spent a career of 40-some years as a conductor with the Mexican National Railroad system. We don't know very much about him, and I've never found evidence that he ever came back. Why did he leave? I don't know. Why did he leave his family here and go first to California and then to Mexico? The major died in 1908 at his daughter's home in Huntington, in the physician's home, in Helen's home there. Well, if you go west this summer or next, plan to stop at Fort Larned. and see what a Wabash band established at that little fort, and be proud of the fact, I think, that they have chosen Kidd and his family as as I say, the poster children there. One of these evenings we'll do a program on roads. There's a lot of material about that, and if I ever solve some of the mysteries about Major Kidd, I'll be back with those too. Thank you for joining us this evening. We look forward to being with you again. Thank you.